so you can get a little impression what also our PhD students are doing.
Increasing evidence shows that spending time in a forest environment has a positive impact on well-being. Foraging for food, sheltering on a hot day, breathing in fresh oxygen, or simply taking in the visual and auditory beauty of the environment. But the question is, how does diversity of trees have a positive impact on our well-being? The Dr. Forest project has been set up across 5 key sites in Europe to quantify the impact of biodiverse forests on human health. Does it matter to human health if the forest is more or less diverse? And could biodiversity decrease negative health impacts? Do dilution effect, natural enemies, and canopy complexity lead to decreased health risks? The Dr. Forest project aims to answer these questions and many more, to engage decision makers in managing forests in a way that promotes biodiversity and human health benefits.
To assess visual diversity and its effects on mental health and well-being, photographs of forests of different species richness were taken in 2020. Currently, participants are sorting these pictures to identify visual differences between forest stands. A similar methodological setup will be applied to forest soundscapes. We hope to start the EEG lab studies in autumn 2021. Effects of forest diversity on microclimate are assessed using small climate stations. They've been set up in all the Dr. Forest sites to record the most important variables for human thermal comfort. The potential harm to humans produced by particulate matter and pollen could be reduced by higher diversity forests. To test this, large numbers of pollen and particulate matter traps will be set up this year. Currently, all trees are being inventoried to determine their heights and stem diameters. This data will be used to estimate canopy roughness and its role in particulate matter capture and filtration. A study designed for a multisensory forest walk is being prepared across several urban forests in order to assess effects of tree species diversity on mental health and well-being. This will help us to compare in situ multisensory setups in real forests with the single sensory exposures to biodiversity in the lab. With results from this work, we will integrate each forest health pathway into one large synthetic model called a Bayesian belief network. This will allow us to detect potential trade-offs or synergies between different pathways. Although postponed by the pandemic, we will also engage stakeholders on this issue. Consortium members participated in several events already, for example, where they engaged in discussions about the development and management of a local spa and their healing forest. A dedicated workshop with stakeholders from professions of policy, research, practice is planned for June 2021 in Germany. Stay tuned for more updates and follow our blog and social media channels.
Yeah, and as you've seen, we are now at this last stage, or this first stage, I have to say, concerning stakeholder involvement. So this workshop is now starting. And I suggest that you keep in mind that we will focus especially on the role of forest biodiversity when discussing health impacts. So we are not so much discussing whether the presence of forest is beneficial for human health or not, but whether the diversity within those forests might be beneficial or might have negative effects on human health. And with that, thanks again for coming, and I directly will hand over to Ulrich.
Yeah, thank you very much, Michael. In fact, I just had the same idea to start my presentation, telling you about the bike ride I had this morning and how lucky I've been about the few trees that are on my way. Luckily, I think, Michael, you come from the south of the city of Freiburg. So you have a different, now you come from the east, it's in the east of Freiburg where you live. I come from the north, so we had the same feelings, even coming from different directions. And perhaps I can add that I was anyhow suffering from the high fever. And I think this was the most terrible high fever situation that we ever had during this year. So nature is a very nice thing, and I had a very nice bike ride this morning. And anyhow, we observe some changes also in our surrounding, and know that a lot of people are suffering at the moment from the high fever, and that we have a very special situation under the climate conditions that we observe. at the moment. So it's anyhow worthy to have a close look on these developments concerning the coolness, concerning Poland, and any other impacts that are within the focus of this project. My name is Ulrich Schrammel. As Michael said, I'm the head of the Forest Research Institute here in Freiburg. Therese has been doing a lot of organizational work to prepare the workshop. So the first thing I should do is to say thank you to Therese and all the other people who helped her to organize this event. I was invited to spend 3 more minutes on the policy issue, forest and health. I will try to do this in 3 minutes. And perhaps I just compare it. When I was doing lectures at the University of Freiburg, what I did for 20 years in the field of forest policy, in general, I started to open a chapter within forest policy, telling the students, well, we have some actors who have an interest in the field of forests, and they somehow are in a situation of competition. They do not work together in many cases. They have conflicts. They struggle in trade-offs, and in general, forest policy is mainly about conflict management. The case of forests and health seems to be somehow different. We have a very large arena, so a lot of people are interested in this field. A lot of stakeholders are interested in this field, and in general, we do not discuss about conflicts in a first glance, but it's still something like an area of harmony. And if you read articles in the newspaper, in general, the journalists report still about the importance of forests, and very late, if they go very into the details, then they will come up with the problems and with the conflicts that are also, of course, some characterization of this policy field too. I see 3 trends that may be important for this subject. One is that we have a lot of societal trends that make health in general important. So there are several lifestyles of people that we can observe, not only these LOHAs that are often cited, as a lot of people have a close look on the health situation, and at least within the situation of COVID-19, within the pandemic, we learned how important outdoor recreation and to be in outdoor is for the health of people. So I think a lot of people learned being indoor is somehow dangerous. The threats are mainly indoors, and the healthy worlds are outdoors, are mainly in the forests. We observed that especially the field of tourism is undergoing a transformation process. So if you take the case of the Black Forests, we have a lot of classical baths, so a lot of big buildings that have been filled by social insurances in the past. So these communities were never in the situation that they really had to make any efforts in the field of marketing. So the insurances were just sending the people, and these communities have been full. They have been crowded by people that have been sent by their insurances. This has changed totally. The communities have to start new ideas. They have to create products. They have to invest in their marketing, and they learn that these lifestyles I have just been talking about are an important basis for these new marketing ideas, for these new business ideas. And so we learn that the communities are really driving forces because they have the infrastructure. They have the infrastructure concerning buildings, but also the infrastructure concerning forests, and they try to bring these 2 things together for the development of these communities. And we have observed several changes in the field of forestry. So everybody in this group here is aware that the forests are changing their face, and this changes the business within forestry. So most of the enterprises are selling timber, and they survive only when timber prices are on a specific level. And they learn within the last years that this is not a stable situation, and that the changes are are much extremer than they had been in the past. And so also forest enterprises think about new business ideas, and we have a very large discourse within Germany, but also in other countries, talking about the compensation of forest ecosystems. So not to repeat the things that have happened in the agricultural policy, but to find new models of funding forest management, and the compensation of ecosystem services is one of these models. And of course, they are all often related to climate policy, but also health issues could be one basis for these compensation schemes. So we feel we see that there's a lot of practice out in the field, a lot of activities within forest enterprises, a lot of people who offer services in this field, and we see that a lot of policy activity is now going on. And this is true for the federal level, this is true for the state level. So we have several platforms on the state and on the federal level where stakeholders meet. And I think this is also something that is very special. As I mentioned, the arena is broad, and these platforms that we have, for example, the WASEC, so this is the platform on the federal level, was a good basis to create new networks between those actors that have traditionally been important within forest policy, so mainly the forest owners, authorities, and these kind of activities, and these kind of actors, and more other actors jump in, and we form new networks. We learn from each other, what is really a very nice and important development for development of forest management and the development of forest policy. The same is true for some forest acts that have already been changed within the last few years. The same is true for forest strategies. We observe this on the federal level. Again, we observe this on the state level. So the strategies, the acts, and policy practice has taken over this field, and a lot of people are involved in this issue of forest, trees, biodiversity, and health. Anyhow, there is need for evidence. So I think the practice was faster than the researchers have been. And this is something that may happen in several times within society, that people are faster if they believe something is true. Now it's to this group to find out whether the things that are already in practice are true, are based on evidence. And anyhow, I'm sure that a lot of people are interested in the results of Dr. Forest. And as you see, the several stakeholders already observed these discussions within in this project. And I wish you very nice discussions during these 2 days, and good luck, good success for the rest of the time, when now natural research mainly is taking over the discussion about forest, trees, biodiversity, and health. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Ulrich.
So Hannes Weinbrenner has been working for the Forest Research Institute, FVA, since 2018. And his work is mainly concerned with research on recreation in the forest and visitors' perceptions of climate change. And he's been working in the newly formed Department of Social Change group at the FVA. And Hannes will be presenting together with Stephanie Beckmann, who is also a sociologist at the Department of Societal Change. In their presentation titled "The Forest as a Living Room and Gym, Understanding Health Issues Through the Lens of COVID-19 Pandemic," results from 2 studies of on the topic of forest and recreation will be presented. Based on the research results, he shows that visiting the forest benefits the mental health of many people, and using the exceptional situation of the COVID-19 pandemic as an example, a theoretical concept was developed on how a visit to the forest can help people deal with psychological stress. So without further ado, Hannes?
Yeah, I will share my screen, and Stephanie, you will start.
Okay, thank you, Katrina, for the introduction, and also for the nice networking opportunity that we had. It was very interesting and inspiring start for the day. Yeah, Hannes Weinbrenner and I will be presenting some empirical insights into recreational practices during the COVID-19 pandemic, but also give some broader context from sociological perspectives in this field of research. And Hannes, next slide, please. We are sharing one presentation, so we have to do it that way. Well, while we already heard that the Dr. Forest project, we are not, this now is not part of the Dr. Forest project in a stricter sense. Dr. Forest focuses mainly, as we heard, on the biological aspects, biological attributes, physical attributes of forests and their impact on health, such as biodiversity's impact on health. But from our sociological standpoint, there is another important factor to be included, which of course is probably included in a lot of the sub-studies also within Dr. Forest. And that is that forests affect people not only through their materiality, not only through their biology, but also through the social meanings that forests have for humans and through the ways that humans engage with their environment, how they interact with forests. And that also plays a crucial role. To give just a very brief example, forests symbolize for many people, like entering into the forest is entering into a different world. And they're having the opportunity to experience things that are very different from my everyday life. So forest here symbolizes, for example, a contrast to our civilized realities. So it is an uncivilized place, and through this also reminds us then of things that are of importance, of value to us, such as being connected to our environment. So there are more social and cultural meanings also embedded in the ways that we interact with forests. Hannes, next slide, please. So these are the research questions that will guide through this presentation and that also more generally guide our work. What do forests mean to forest visitors? How do they actively engage with their forest environments? But then also, in the broader sense, how do social and political contexts shape people's relationships to forests? And we're looking today for this workshop at these three questions as they are related and linked to health issues. And Hannes will start now with giving you the empirical insights from the COVID-19 study. And we'll focus on the first two questions, meanings of forests and engagements with forests. And I will then briefly close at the ending, talking a little bit about social and political contexts and how they also play a role, for example, in offering opportunities, helping or hindering the promotion of health issues in forestry, implementing this in forestry and in forest policy. Hannes, the floor now is yours.
Thanks. So, as Katrina already said, I will be presenting results from two different studies. The first one is our COVID-19 study, which was a case study in the area around Freiburg, and it was conducted in April and May 2020. And the other one is called WAMOS, which was a population survey in the whole of Baden-Württemberg, and which was also conducted in March and April 2020. It had basically nothing to do with the COVID situation. It was planned for a long time, and coincidentally, it was conducted at the same time that the first lockdown hit. And for you, the blue color scheme graphs I will show you are from the COVID study, and the green color scheme graphs are from the WAMOS study. So first, some background information. Here you can see 77% of the population of Baden-Württemberg is visiting forests in their free time. So we asked them, have you been in the forest in your free time the past 12 months? And 77% state yes. So those people were then asked how often they visit forests. And here you can see on the left-hand side, in wintertime, around a third of those who visit forests at all visit forests once a week or more often, while 2/3 visit them less than once a week. And in summertime, you can see a quite different picture. So here, around half of the people who visit forests go there once a week or more often. So that's quite interesting to see that shift in summer and winter time. And when we focus now on the COVID situation in spring of 2020, you can see here that around 2/3 or 62% of those who we asked increased the frequency of their forest visit compared to the time before the lockdown hit. And only 2% decreased the frequency of their forest visits. And interestingly, of those who increased the frequency of their forest visits, 70% also increased the duration they stayed there. So both the frequency and the duration of forest stays intensified or got more. So when we focus a bit more on health issues, you can see here from our Vamos study, we asked the people whether they agree or disagree. By visiting the forest, I want to do something for my health. And you can see in general, 83% of the respondents agreed with this statement. So the linkage between forest recreation and health issues is quite strong in the minds of the people. This has lots of facets and it's quite fragmented, this aspects of forest and health for the people. And here you can see just two variables. We asked them on the left-hand side, you can see the statement, a visit to forest provides me with support and comfort. So that's true for around 55%. And on the right-hand side, you can see in the forest, I experience myself more connected to the present, which is also true for around 54%. So support and comfort connected to the present, these are both aspects which are linked with psychological well-being, with the stress being not there, with feeling comfortable. So that's something that's very important to people apparently while visiting the forest. And to give you some illustration on how people perceive these feelings, here's some quotes from our COVID study. On the left-hand side, gyms are closed, so as a way to compensate jogging and walking in the forest. Or the forest distracts me from the COVID-19 news and the resulting anxiety and gives me a sense of meaning. Or I feel comfortable in the forest, not so many people, fresh and good air out of the four walls, peace and quiet from the city. Or I meet friends more often for a walk in the forest instead of going to the cafe. And as you can see here, the motives for people going to the forest are quite diverse. So they have a sense of meaning, they feel peace and quiet, but they also have the opportunity to meet friends there. And to see how widespread these different strategies, these different approaches to forests are, we conducted a principal component analysis. And here we can see the results. 4 motives emerged. And the first one is exercising sports. So this is important for 98%, partially or completely. Coping with psychological stress is important for 91%, partially or completely. Social distancing, a very new thing in the COVID-19 era, is important for 74%. And quite the contrary, being among people is also important for 58%. And of course, for our topic today, the top motive, coping with psychological stress, seems to be most interesting. And we asked ourselves in our study, how does it actually work from a sociological standpoint? So how can people cope with psychological stress when they go to a forest? How does it work? And we developed a theoretical explanation for it by referring to the theory of space appropriation. This is a theory that was developed in social work or in spatial research. And as the name actually suggests, it's about making spaces or objects or even skills one's own. You appropriate something by interacting with it, by learning how to use it, and so on. A very common example for that is urban gardening. That means when people are planting or greening traffic islands in the area where they live. So that would be an example of space appropriation. And in our evaluation, we found out that space appropriation also played a major role in the forest during the first lockdown in March and April in 2020. For example, children started to use a forest as their playground or as their kindergarten. Adults started to use the forest as their gym, as their dance studio, as their yoga studio. Others collected or changed materials in the forest. Some built huts or dammed up rivers. And others approached and appropriated the forest more on a sensual level, like they smelled the forest, they listened, and so on. And these practices of appropriation of space, they generate a specific knowledge of the space. And more than that, they create a space that was not there before. Like when you look in the second picture, the women who are doing sports there, For them, in this specific moment of time, this part of the forest is actually their gym. However, when they leave, this is not a gym anymore. Maybe people go there to just sit around or walk their dog or whatever. But in this specific moment, for these 3 women, it is actually a gym. And this practice of active appropriation of space creates a sense of agency and control for many. This is a phenomenon which is widely known from architectural psychology. And in this phase of the pandemic, like in the start of the pandemic, everything was very new, very uncontrollable, very overwhelming. And by appropriating space, people could feel control and agency again. And that seemed like to be very helpful for many to regain that feeling of agency. However, in a specific space, the more strict or restrictive rules are, the less likely it is that people feel this possibility to appropriate a space and to feel the freedom to actively engage with it. So the stricter rules are, the less likely it is that this mechanism is happening, that people regain agency and control. And to sum it up a bit, in a metaphor, you could say that the forest is a place where you can find psychological balance. And this works in 2 paths. On the left-hand side, you can see compensation. That means when you visit a forest, you can compensate for something that is not longer there anymore. Like in COVID-19, cafes were closed, playgrounds were closed, dance studios and gyms were also closed. But you can go to the forest and compensate the lack of something. You can go there and do the things you did normally there, now in the forest. And on the other hand, on the right-hand side, you can see coping. You can cope with additional stresses like fear of infection, the limited working hours due to home office, or the lack of social contacts. So both paths did work on the one hand side, compensate the lack of something or cope with additional stresses. And both ways did have some similarities. Both made it possible for people to regain agency and control, and both were described as very positive experiences. So that's the explanation we found how people actually manage to cope with psychological stress due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, now to you, Stephanie. You're unmuted.
Yeah, well, this was a specific or more detailed insight into the empirical work. I want to make just some closing remarks, going back again or tying it back again to the broader context. And well, Hannes has given us one example of how forests can support public health in the middle of a severe crisis in our society. And well, with this picture, I want to I want to suggest that there is, of course, more crisis ahead, more crisis concerning public health and more crisis also concerning the roles of forests in our society. But also these crises, I think, might open windows of opportunity. And Ulrich Schrammel has already mentioned a few of those broader contexts, and I just want to go into detail just with a handful of these aspects of broader changes that are ahead. So maybe we can go to the next slide, Hannes. I want to put into the focus, of course, the crisis of climate change and how this context plays a role in the field that we are discussing today. Of course, climate change brings major health threats, new health threats to the population, and forests are already considered a very important resource in dealing with these health threats. So on the one hand, of course, in reducing the effects of climate change, but also reducing health effects on a local level, for example, through offering shade, offering protection or relief from these effects. Ulrich Schrammel has already also mentioned that climate change has to do with the business model of forestry or might induce change there, because forestry so far has been very timber focused in its idea of the products that it delivers. And now climate change weakens this model really. And so there is a kind of an inducement to different kinds of ecosystem services and marketing them also. And then climate change has moved to the top of the political agenda globally. But with this also, redefinitions of our very relationship with nature have moved to that political agenda. So the discussions that also ecosystem services and health services of forests are situated in have a lot to do with our societies on even a global political scape. That we think about how we as societies relate to nature, how we use natural resources, and how we as humans are connected to the environment, to the planet that we live on, and how we are part of nature ourselves, and how we want to, what follows for our political and practical actions from that. So with this, we're going to the next slide. I want to just illustrate how this, for example, has played a role in forestry conflicts in the last years in Germany. We've been looking at citizen initiatives and other kinds of forest conflicts. And two things I want to point out. One is that we see a growing number of protests against the primacy of economic objectives in forestry. So people are not willing to accept that forests are mainly for timber production or mainly for economic purposes, but they are worried that other values of forests are not considered enough in forestry. This is just a small trend, but a growing trend within the debates about forestry. And on the other hand, the forest owners and the foresters are not willing or less willing today to provide all kinds of societal benefits without having recompensation schemes that will allow them to do that and to continue to provide these services. So there is a huge window of opportunity here coming from different sides, called for from different actors to find new ways of providing ecosystem services, among them also, of course, health. With this, we're going to the last slide, Hannes. And I just want to make this closing statement to our talk that the time seems to be now for promoting diverse cultural ecosystem services, and that when we do that, we have to, of course, consider evidence, scientific evidence on the biological, on the medical level, but also on that we have to consider the social, the cultural, and the political factors that play a role in how this can be achieved, and also in the impact that forests have actually on people. And this is the understanding that I have of the workshop that we have come together for these 2 days here to discuss, that we bring all these different perspectives really together, and that we have a lot of very specialized experts from different fields and try together to paint a bigger picture that includes all of these very diverse aspects. And I hope that with our sociological perspective, we can contribute a little bit to the whole scope of the discussion that we can have over these 2 days. Thank you.
Amanda. Yeah, I have a small question, actually. Maybe I missed it in the first slides of the survey. Could you talk a little bit about who you surveyed? I'm curious as the demographics.
Sure, I will just reshare my screen, maybe. Oops. That was the wrong screen. So this slide probably. So on the left-hand side in our case study, it was just a case study in the area around Freiburg. It's not a representative sample, but we had over 700 participants in the area around Freiburg. It was the sample was quite okay. People were relatively young and relatively well educated, so that's an issue, of course. But we did not only do this quantitative research in our COVID study, we also analyzed Instagram posts. These were the pictures you could see about the appropriation practices. And we also went to the forests ourselves and did some participant observation. So we had a mixed methods design on qualitative and quantitative approaches and tried to shed some light from different perspectives on the problem. And on the right-hand side, the WAMA study is a population survey. It had 2018 participants, and we had age, gender, and education status as our quotas for the sample.
Yes, hi everyone, and first of all, thanks for this wonderful talk. was very, very interesting. And yeah, obviously I'm from the work package of psychological restoration, so this was also very relevant to what we are actually doing. So I was actually, like, to be honest, I've never heard of this space appropriation, and I find it very interesting. And also the pictures that you've shown were quite, yeah, making it obvious what actually happens in the forest. So what I was just wondering, because we're also having a look at stress reduction theory from Roger Ulrich. I don't know whether you've heard of this already. So we're also investigating this, and we're considering this as one of the mediating pathways. And I was just wondering whether you have, whether you also looked at, like, empirically, whether this space appropriation specifically also led to the stress reduction. Was this one of the mechanisms that you also found in your data, or did you only use this as a theoretical approach on how this could happen, or do you have data on this?
So we don't have a real, like, hard data from our quantitative survey. However, we did our participant observation and these Instagram analysis. And the more we analyzed, the more obvious was that something was missing in our idea and our understanding. And somehow we came across this theoretical concept of space appropriation, and it seemed so well fitting. Like, it was so obvious that what's really happening in the forest. And then we read some articles from Antje Vlade. I don't know how popular she is. I think she's a professor for psychology. And she did some research on this architectural psychology and stress reduction. And then we found, okay, that's our mechanism. That's how it works, actually.
Raising her hand.
Yeah, yeah. I was just wanted to add a little remark on that, because I think it might actually be a strength of a quantitative study that we don't consider the qualitative part only as being, so to say, a pre-step to developing the better questionnaire, but I think especially these practices in the forest and perceptions in the forest are in part very, very difficult for people to talk about, and so a lot of this is not conscious in the sense, or it doesn't seem relevant when people think about their forest visits. So it might actually be something that can, in the way that we worked with it now, can only be found out really through qualitative data.
Hand up.
I would suspect.
Yeah, so thank you very much for this very interesting study. Are you intending to continue this this year? So to see, because I mean, we have had now a long spell of COVID, and so maybe this then triggered actually behavioral change. And so it will be interesting to see whether people are keeping that behavior. Yeah, and whether they, through experiencing this, actually maintain that, or whether they return to gyms, so indoor gyms.
Yeah, actually, yesterday in our lunch break, we were discussing how we could keep this project going. However, it was just like a small side project with no real funding. So it's quite hard to keep it going over a long period of time. But I guess the findings, the results we had, they are going to be implemented into new studies, into new designs, into new ideas for projects. But yeah, I think what you mentioned, the idea that maybe people will stay in the forest to do their gym work or to do their yoga class, that's something we have to be aware of, and that's quite interesting.
Yeah, or maybe it's too bad that you can't. I mean, that's the way it is sometimes, that you can't continue this. But it would be really nice if the patterns stay, or if there are some. Obviously, at that stage, it was an external trigger with the COVID situation, a very strong trigger. But whether other triggers, so management triggers, can help to maintain that. So, yeah. Maybe even that this is communicated, so even more. And then I had another question. So whether appropriation of space, is that the same as sense of place?
So I guess the sense of space is it's more like a specific knowledge of a place or a feeling that's connected with a space, while these appropriation practices are more focused on what people actually do, like the engagement, the approach to the space. That's what's interesting for appropriation practices.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's the difference between the two.
Okay, so thank you very much. And I'm very happy to be in this workshop, and that we have the opportunity to actually get the input from practice and policy. And therefore, I would like to give a short overview on biodiversity and health and some of our results already. I'm combining here results from the whole team and from the Dr. Forest Consortium. And I would like to start off with giving a little bit of political background. No, my screen isn't moving. I'm sorry. I don't know why this is so complicated at the moment, because I've used WebEx a lot.
It's okay. Perhaps there's just a
It's not doing anything at the moment, so let's see. Okay. Now it's working. Okay. So obviously, and I don't have to say this, so this would be carrying out to Athens. We are experiencing a severe biodiversity crisis. And we don't need to be reminded, but I say it anyway, we missed the 2010 goals and we missed the 2020 goals. We are at the moment discussing the 2050 vision for biodiversity, and the Conference of the Parties is going to meet later this year. And the SAPSA meeting has just been finalized, and we have the IPBES report as well on the dire assessment of biodiversity. At the same time, we're experiencing and we're losing species at a rate 100 times higher than would be expected by normal background extinctions. At the same time, we're experiencing a rising climate or temperatures and global change there, as well as severe demographic changes. So we know that at the moment already 50% of all people live in cities, and by 2050 it's going to be 70%. And what I think is, or what we have to realize, is that the biodiversity crisis is coupled with the climate crisis, and I would say it's also a triple crisis, because it corresponds also to the health crisis. And this is not because we had ample, or we had very, very good policies actually, but despite that, we have a decreasing biodiversity and we experience biodiversity loss. And we have got only, I would say we are experiencing some tipping points already, and we have to see how we can bend the curve. And this is obviously the ominous paper, or the very important paper by Georgina Mays, who I would like to pay tribute to. We've entered now the United Nations Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, and we are marrying this, our biodiversity goals, also with the Sustainable Development Goals. However, I think what we have to do is that we have to see that we actually argue this, so that we give the foundation, the science for this, but also the ways how to implement, how to move towards action, how to move to solutions, and how to actually work across the sectors of biodiversity, climate, and health. Because with the decreasing biodiversity loss, we can also see that we have seen an increasing cost in health spending. And so, for example, for Germany, we are already at 11.3% of the Bruttosozialprodukt, or GDP. And we are also seeing increasing demographics, not only that the world population is rising, but that also the urban population is rising, and therefore being exposed to more climate risk as well as health risks. 77% in Europe, 70% of the diseases are non-communicable. We've just heard about the communicable disease of virus disease, but most diseases are actually non-communicable. And these are, for example, cardiovascular diseases, as well as 77 million of people in Europe are suffering from depression and anxiety. And this is actually, so these non-communicable diseases are the single largest contributor to non-fatal health losses and equate to 3 million years of life with disability. Here, forests and biodiversity can help, and if it was only for 10 or 20% of bending that curve. This was already realized in our Convention of Biological Diversity. So even already in 1992, the CBD states We are aware that conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity is of critical importance for meeting the food, health, and other needs of a growing world population. So this was always at the heart of biodiversity conservation as well, and was reinforced, for example, by the 2010 Aichi targets that by 2020, which was last year's, ecosystems that provide essential services, including services related to water and contribute to health, livelihoods, and well-being, are restored and safeguarded. We are not there yet, and we have to reach that now by the next 10 years. And so already in 2015, there is a Global Health Alliance between the Convention of Biological Diversity and the World Health Organizations, which quote in their joint report on the knowledge review that all human health ultimately depends on ecosystem services that are made possible by biodiversity and products derived from them. And I think if we can here provide the evidence, but also the means to actions and implement basis into implementation, we can move forward. Here, the BFN, so our conservation agency, already held a conference in 2017, and some of these results are published in the open access book on biodiversity and health in the face of climate change, where I was happy to develop that. But importantly, it's also it's finding its way into official documents. But what I said is that policy is obviously not just enough. We also need to find ways to act on this, and therefore this it's great to meet today and the stakeholder workshops. It was also the science obviously has already, it's been long suspected that biodiversity and health belong together, and this was already prominent in the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, where the ecosystem services, and I don't think I have to repeat them here, are linked to constituents of well-being, and health was one of them, but we see obviously it's health and well-being which is a larger assortment. But as we can see also from this graph, this was really disjointed in the sciences, and that's why I'm really happy that in Dr. Forest we're working with experts from health and psychology together with biologists and ecologists to establish these links. And so we were lucky to publish actually this year a conceptual framework, which was also is one of the first papers also from Dr. Forest with colleagues, and which was led by Melissa Marcel, who I think can't be here today, working in my lab, and with several experts from Europe and the US, where we thought about conceptually how does biodiversity actually link to health and well-being. So first of all, biodiversity can have obviously direct effects on health and what are the mediating pathways. So biodiversity can obviously have a direct effect on reducing harm, but mostly, for example, by cleaning the air, having aspects on global climate through, for example, CO2, carbon sequestration. So there needs to be no direct contact with people. So biodiversity in itself can have can obviously have some aspects, but usually it is through contact with biodiversity, and their exposure as well as experience matter. And these can lead through four different pathways. For example, by reducing harm, for example, reducing exposure to environmental stresses like heat and air pollution, or also providing of medicines, food, and clean water. By restoring capacities, we just heard this in the last talk, by, for example, relieving stress and facilitating stress recovery, or restoring attention, and providing by building capacities, for example, encouraging physical activities, or also facilitating transcendent experiences, maybe also spiritual experiences. But we should not forget that it can also cause harm, for example, increasing risk of allergies, infectious diseases, or carrying a harmful microbiota, which we are also covering in Dr. Forest. And these pathways can lead to different aspects of health and well-beings. They're obviously moderated by the environmental, social, cultural context of people and individual characteristics. And what we would like to, what we want to explore in Dr. Forest is to see, well, how do these pathways actually work, and how are these links actually materialized for forests with respect to biodiversity. So overall, project, Dr. Forest, can be seen in how can actually forest biodiversity contribute to restoring and building capacities, so mental and physical health and well-being. On the one hand, a psychological restoration, but also physical aspects like recreation, aspects of climate, but also, for example, provisional services like forest products by, for example, a collection of edible fruits and fungi. But then, on the other hand, where can it also lead to reducing harm or maybe also increasing harm, for example, through disease factors and aerial pollution? I will try to do a short overview of this. And so where we're looking in the different work packages on the one hand on soundscapes and visual aesthetics, on physical health and recreation, on exposure to disease vectors and exposure to air pollution. But interestingly is that we have to see, as biologists, obviously we often work with species identity and species composition, but we have to ask ourselves, is it always the actual biodiversity which we would measure, for example, in botanical surveys or or also animal surveys, or is it the perceived biodiversity, or is it maybe the experienced biodiversity? So these are questions which we cover as well. If I start off with the first work package, I would like to give some background that obviously green spaces are health promoters, and we had already some of the examples in the last talk. And this was a large study in the UK where it could be seen that time spent in natural environments, this was a large cohort study across the whole of the UK, a survey study, and where they could establish that spending half an hour a day or 2.5 hours over the whole week in green spaces significantly increase the reporting of good health. And we do know that, and this made the news in the in newspapers and so on. And so life satisfaction is positively associated with the amount of green space around the home. But often this is just green space, and we don't actually know what is green space, what is actually nature, and we have to get closer to this. So, for example, in a recent study we conducted in Leipzig, connected to trees, obviously in the city. Here we used trees and looked at the identity of street trees, because we have obviously information from catasters, and these are obviously also some things which you can easily retrofit as an investment into health. And we used a very hard indicator of mental health, and this was the prescription rate of antidepressants. You can see the maps of trees in Leipzig and also the density. And our hypothesis was that the diversity of trees matters and the density of trees matters. Actually, tree species diversity and tree species richness did not matter, and nor did the identity at the moment. But we drew buffers around the home of people, and this is also an important measure. And we looked at distances of 1,000 meters to 1 kilometer, 500, 300, 100. And just to summarize the results quickly, we could see that there was a significant effect of the trees directly around the home in 100 meters. So the street tree in front of your house, which had a significant decrease of the effect size of antidepressant medication prescriptions. So what this also means is that it's maybe the unintentional everyday encounter as a mechanism that counts. So obviously, and here we could also show that this was especially true for people of low socioeconomic status, individuals, and thereby, for example, trees can also help to, street trees can help to mitigate some social inequality and health benefits. What I would like to say here, this is obviously correlational, and in Dr. Forest, we would like to look at experimental settings where we can actually look at the effects. It's not only about the visual signals, so this is what we often assume, but it's also about the sounds. We are using these two senses, and we know that soundscapes are really important. And maybe even you all know the Silent Spring from Rachel Carson. It was the lack of sounds in the 1960s, which really formed the environmental movement starting in the US. And I think this was also renewed maybe also during COVID last year, that people listen to this. So this is work which is led by the team around Michael Scherer-Lorenzen and Sandra Miller and Taylor Shaw. And where we have to think about, so it's not only the biological sounds, so biophony, but there is also the anthropophony, human activities, and geophony, for example, abiotic activities like leaves rustling. And so we have to think about how our soundscapes are conducted, and we have several soundscape recorders in the Dr. Forest sites now, and they are obviously it's about animals and vegetation, for example, looking producing this biophonal sounds. And just to add to this, here we could show in a recent study, also in a lab study, that, for example, perceived restorativeness rose with bird sounds, perceived bird species richness, but it was impacted by perceived traffic noise. This was an experimental study and a lab study conducted by a PhD student in our lab in Brisbane. But here what we can see is that there is an interaction of sounds, and this is something we're going to explore also in Dr. Forest. And here, Sandra Müller and her team could also show that near Freiburg, there was a relationship of forest structure, landscape, and acoustic diversity. And these are recorded with acoustic diversity is being recorded, and you can see that the brighter the signals, the more diverse there is. You can hear more in the breakout rooms, and that we could see that she could show that forage patch diversity, vertical diversity, as well as bird species richness, all were associated with acoustic diversity. And what we want to see is whether this has an effect on mental health and well-being. So what we're going to do is, in work package 1, we're going to look at visualscapes and soundscapes and ask the questions whether forest and tree diversity promotes mental health and well-being. On the one hand, by looking at high, medium, and low visual and auditory forest and tree diversity, and looking here specifically whether this is mediated through stress recovery and attention restoration. Kevin just mentioned that in the discussion, and whether this leads then to enhanced mental health and mental well-being. And we're going to do this both with controlled lab and online experiments, as well as a forest walk, where we have a multisensory experience. And it would be great to work with you together to see how this can be realized, and especially for the forest walks, which are going to take place in September, it will be very nice to work with you together. So for the visual experiments, this will be also an online experiment, which will be then which people can take and do in their own time. We looked at the different diverse forests, and I used photos from the different Dr. Forest sites. And what we wanted to see also whether people can actually see that this is low, medium, and high biodiversity, and what is it about forest diversity which people take, because it's not only species diversity and species richness. And we're going to discuss this in the breakout room as well. And then lastly, also discuss the forest walks, where we're going to have a forest bathing intervention, and then work together with all colleagues of the Dr. Forest project across 4 sites in Europe to see how this impacts on both psychological and thermal comfort, and how this can be combined, so in an actual field experiment. I'm trying to hurry up a little bit because I would like to also introduce the other work packages. So the second one was that we not only look at mental health and well-being, but also physical health and well-being. And here it is obviously about the effects of climate. And we do know that heat waves lead to heat stress and heat strokes and deaths. And in the extreme year of 2003, we experienced 70,000 excess deaths in Europe over the summer. And in Belgium, for example, it's prospected that 1 to 27 heatwave days will occur in the next 30 years under business as usual scenario. And these have obviously extreme health effects, and we would see which solutions can forests offer to biodiversity, through biodiversity. From the literature, we already know that parks can, on average, lower the surrounding temperatures by 1 degree. This doesn't seem much, but on average this can be a lot. And obviously, it can if you're in the park and you can increase, you can actually have even greater effects. a study around Freiburg, I think, has established actually even higher effects that forests can lead to a reduction of at least even 4 degrees, and especially also ambient temperatures at night. So I think nighttime temperatures are even more important sometimes for health effects. And this was a study around Freiburg, that wind chill factors can obviously vary much more, so that this is the experienced temperature can also be dropped. This is obviously an extreme factor, but we also know, for example, in big cities, like in Berlin, we can have at night times we can have differences of up to 10 degrees from for example, from the Grunewald to the center of the city. And so forests play a strong role, especially also in the vicinities of cities, and therefore the forest walks are actually not the Dr. Forest sites, the remote sites, but we're going to use city associated sites. So what is going to be what we can look at is are both the micro and the macroclimate. So on the one hand, there can be direct short-term shading by shelter from radiation, but also obviously long-term impacts by evapotranspiration and CO2 sequestration. So that there could be a indirect long-term effects which biodiversity can have. This is taken forward by PhD student Loic in Belgium, and he's put out loggers, which you could see already in the film, with temperature and radiation, humidity, and air and wind speed, and to assess the effects of tree species and diversity and abundance. And this will also be part of the forest walks, where we're going to subject people to a controlled low, medium, and high biodiversity to do walks, and then I'll look at thermal comfort measures, which are objective, subjective, and psychological, as well as mental health and well-being measures. And this will be the combined study of forest walks, which we're going to conduct in September. Obviously, we're looking at health factors, but we also see that biodiversity can cause harm. And what our hypothesis is that tree species diversity can obviously also mitigate some of the harmful factors, for example, disease factors. Here at the disease vectors, we look at ticks and urticating caterpillars. This is mainly the work carried over our colleagues in France, and how this impacts on human health. I think I don't need to tell you, so you know that ticks are obviously prevalent across the whole of Europe, and especially Ixodes ricinus, and that they carry different bacteria and viruses, and especially the ecology of Lyme disease is well known, and the prevalence of Borrelia is high, and therefore may also actually deter people from going outside, and may have adverse effect of experiencing biodiversity in forests and trees. And the same is for urticating larvae, for example, the oak processional caterpillars, which can lead to severe rashes and skin irritations through their hairs. And so the prediction or the hypotheses are that tree species diversity can, on the one hand, lead to greater predator abundance, and therefore a decreased and host dilution and a decreased host quality, and thereby impact the disease factors by first of all decreasing the abundance, but also the performance, and to decrease the tick-borne disease prevalence, and also decrease the risk of urtication, and thereby decrease the risk of urtication and tick-borne diseases. Here, some results which can be seen already from Dr. Forest in previous studies by Heather Yachtel and his team, where we could show that tree species richness already has a significant impact on broadleaf tree defoliation, and that also species composition matters, and species richness matters. so that the higher the species richness, the lower the average defoliation. And it also matters which species are here. So for two quercus, so oak species, as well as a mixture of oak and broadleaf species, he could show a decreased, a significant effect on average defoliation. And some first results from Audrey Bowden, the PhD in Dr. Forest. She could show that nymphophane abundance of ticks was higher in pine stands than in birch and pine stands together, and so that as well as birch and oak stands, so tree composition mattered, but also whether the stands were irrigated, so or whether they were dry. And so these are preliminary results, and this will be discussed in one of the breakout sessions. Moving on to the last one on clean air and as well as air pollution, we know that air pollution is obviously one of the 5 leading health risks globally. Only surpassed by high blood pressure, smoking, and high blood sugar, and that there are 4.5 million premature deaths per year. And through the air pollutants, these are, for example, ozone, nitrous oxides, and sulfur dioxides, but also particulate matters, which are the focus of Dr. Forest here. And where we can see whether the forest can have a significant effect and how this impacts on health. And just to give the worldwide figures, air pollution is a global problem. And I think just last week, several cities in Germany have also been suspected, and that there are several districts which are significantly exceed their air pollution regulations, and where actually traffic measures have to be taken. But as you can see, this is a global problem, and where it exceeds and leads to severe health risks, which are not only to the lungs, but it can lead also to strokes. Blood clots affect the vascular system through atherosclerosis, but even heart problems, but also reproductory failure. And here it is important that obviously other physical, other aspects of where we would think that would be health beneficial, so effects of exercise can obviously interact with those, and that 5 times more pollutants may be inhaled, and so there are interactions of health effects. And so what this work package is led by our colleagues in Austria and Vienna is going to be led is that they're investigating how integrating tree species identity and diversity maps onto particulate matter absorption. And this there are several variables which play a role, for example, leaf area index, as well as canopy structure, but also micro and macro structural traits of the leaves. For example, surface roughness, stomata, and so on, and leaf shape. And that particulate matter comes in also obviously in various shapes and forms. And here we have to see how does biodiversity, tree species identity, as well as composition matter, and how can this then be used, for example, to retrofit something and provide nature-based solutions to health benefits. So I hope I could give a short overview of the science behind the our Dr. Forest project and program with the different work packages, and that we can elaborate on those in the different breakout sessions. And I hope coming back to biodiversity practice and policy, we've now have our EU biodiversity strategy, and we are going to obviously have to develop our national biodiversity strategy at some point, and then also our local biodiversity strategy. And I hope we can come up something similar. I'm just taking one of the strategies from Berlin, where the slogan is Biodiversität macht glücklich, biodiversity makes you happy. And I hope that we here can link biodiversity, climate, and health in order to really make tracks, and that we can contribute some of the evidence with the Dr. Forest project. Thank you very much.
What is the kind of evidence for diversity effects in the literature so far on human health in general? What would be your general kind of maybe gut feeling or from your review work and what you have published in your book, is the evidence kind of general? Are we still at a level to start to understand these questions? And therefore, our project might be an important contribution? Or do you think there is, as Uli Schrammel said in his introductory word, or is science behind the action of people? So do people and managers already use these arguments to manage urban parks, urban streets, and science is a bit lacking behind that?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I do think that there is sound evidence that green space, first of all, green space is beneficial. And I think what we can now, and I think it's time to act and use these nature-based solutions. So on a variety of aspects. It would be very nice to actually, there is a lot of research, especially in the Anglo-Saxon world, so in the UK and US and Canada, where social prescribing, for example, using these nature-based solutions, so health walks. I know that in Freiburg, in the Black Forest, they're using this as well. So that's, I think Kerstin Emsinger might be here as well. So she's already looking at some of the effects. But in general, I have to say that we don't necessarily understand these pathways yet enough, and also not the dose of nature. Also, what we're moving towards is that as biologists, we obviously always think, well, it's a species identity, which is important. It's not so much. So many people, so there's also some people are blind to, there is sort of the slogan of plant blindness. So people don't necessarily, or they don't identify species as we would as biologists. But there may be structural components, there may be architectural components, there may be also the movement through this, and this comes from landscape ecology. So some of this we are going to look at. Kevin is going to, we did this with this sorting of the pictures that we already saw that people use other measures. What we have is very often our correlational studies, and therefore the good thing here is that we actually move here to experimental design, and that's the novel thing about Dr. Forest. However, I would not advocate that we have to wait for the Dr. Forest results in order to act. So that's not my message. Rather, that it would be great to work with the different projects which have been presented, for example, just now in the previous talk, and where we could then see whether we could marry even more some of the actual actions which are being taken forward by forestry already, and whether we could accompany them with some of, okay, Dr. Forest can't do everything in this project, but where we can move towards working together more and accompany them with our methods to actually quantify this. But at the same time, and I think this is the point of the breakout sessions, incorporate already some of the knowledge which is out there already, so that we don't do studies for the sake of it, but that we actually are very close to what matters to management and policy, and that we can now tweak the design so that this provides the best answers for policy and management. Yeah.
Start talking now. You mentioned plant blindness, Aletta, and a lot of the hypothesized pathways of positive biodiversity effects go through perceived biodiversity. So I was wondering if we can increase health benefits if people learn more about biodiversity and if they perceive biodiversity better. So if they learn plants again and identifying plants, will that make them healthier in the long run? I mean, could that be a pathway that works?
Cool study. We should really go for this. So there is some. I think it was published last year. I'm not quite sure whether it's published already, but where they used nature experience. So I think what we are not only seeing is a loss of biodiversity, but also a loss of nature experience. And one study in Israel, they asked participants not only to walk along a certain path, but also to smell the flowers. And so we will see how much we can incorporate that into our forest walks, because we have to see how many variables we can include. But if you sense if you use your senses, which is being used by the forest bathing, for example, more that you identify, for example, so as biologists we say, well, we identify them. You could also draw the plants. You could listen to the birds more attentively and learn them maybe, so that you know, okay, well, this is a chaffinch, this is, oh, I can hear them now. I don't only recognize the pirul or nightingale, I mean, these are special birds, but that we then already the diversity comes to us. But what we have to say is, so in the experience, so in the lab experiment with the bird diversity and sounds, we had people who didn't know the sounds, but it was actually pretty close that the experienced or perceived biodiversity they didn't know. We asked them, so how many birds do you think you're hearing? Even if they couldn't name them, that was pretty close. So there was a close relationship between actual biodiversity and perceived biodiversity. So that's why people don't always need to know. But what you're saying is whether learning about biodiversity and so actual experiencing biodiversity, for example, to forest bathing, can be an intervention measure for health. I think we are already starting the next research program. It would be great, to come out of with these questions, and I hope we can answer some of this also in Dr. Forrest. Thank you, Sandra.
Remark, it seems, at least us foresters, and I think big parts of the science know that as well, biodiversity is very important for the health of the forest itself. So it's like almost the basis, because we don't have to think about health of people if the forest is not healthy. So that's just a remark I wanted to add for all the people that are not too engaged in forest. And then I have a question due to things that I learned at university, saying that the well-being of people in the forest depends on what they are used, concerning of what does the forest look like. So I'm from the Baltic coast. I grew up here. I'm used to pine stands within which you can look for 10 kilometers straight. And of course, I know beech forest, I know diverse forest, but I'm used to looking at very less diversity or low diversity. Is the health effect for me in a stand with low diversity higher than for somebody who's maybe from the Black Forest with at least three tree species in the same stand?
Yeah, thanks for. So it's really important. So we should somehow capture this, so where people are coming from geographically. We did this actually also with some of the studies that we said, well, how long have you lived in this area, so that we know how familiar they are. Maybe we could take this up in the forest walks, that we say, well, where did you grow up? So where did you have your formative experiences, maybe? Because I can well imagine. So for example, these coniferous and Kiefern, they're not something which I would relate to, because I come from a big Buchenhain, right? And then what is behind me is Bialoveja, so there will be some other people, some other experiences. So I cannot say anything about this at the moment. We are also going to look at other moderating factors. So obviously demography, so socio-cultural aspects are going to play a role. We have to see how much we can ask people, because we don't want to disturb them too much. But that's an important thing. We also knowledge. We know, so previous knowledge, if you're a biologist or if you know about forests, it can also enhance your experience. We will ask about this, so this can be a moderator. But also nature relatedness, we're going to use that. So there are several scales, so tested scales for this. So we're going to incorporate that as well. But I think it's important. So what you're used to, and I am actually pretty open. I'm not quite sure how, coming also back to what Michael just said, maybe species diversity will not play such a big role. It could be, which in this case could also be a good message, just preempting this. So, because then you can say, well, you can plant species due to different factors, for example, for forest health, for other health factors. So if the mental health, for example, isn't affected by the tree species richness, but other factors, then you can actually say, okay, well, then I can, that actually frees me because mental health or well-being could be delivered by different kinds of forest, even maybe, I do know people who are also happy in monocultures. So I think it's sometimes the train eye. But yeah, thank you. We will take this up in the forest walks. And yeah, but that's why in order to do this, we obviously, the more variables we have about the persons, the more people we need to, that they take part in the forest walks. And it will be quite an undertaking to do this. So we will need to work together with foresters in the different sites to do this. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And maybe one thought added. Being someone who knows a lot about the forest maybe makes it harder to relax in forest than for people that don't know any species, they don't know anything about it, they just think, oh, forest is beautiful, and that's it. And if they then manage to go take a walk for 2 hours and not look at the cell phone, the effect might be even better than for somebody like me having 2 cell phones with him, thinking about things that are not okay in the forest. So that might be good as well. And just checking, okay, there's a bird singing, and not taking care of what bird might be a positive aspect.
That's right. Yeah. So yep. Correct. Yeah.
I hope it was fruitful discussion for the other groups as well. Kevin, Aleta, or Sandra, if you want to just summarize, what was your impression of the breakout room session?
Yeah, well, I also really felt the time was just running, and I never had a look at the Jamboard, unfortunately, but I see that others luckily did. So basically, we had a very nice and very fruitful discussion with very many forest bathing instructors, which was also really nice. So thanks for joining. Well, and actually, yeah, so we pretty much discussed a lot about the forest walks, basically, and about how we can make sure that this is really also a forest bathing intervention without instructing them too much. I think this is also something that really popped up a lot. Yeah, so how we can make sure that, for example, also people are not stressed out right away when they arrive at the patches, and they just have like kind of like a basic level of autonomous nervous system activity. So we got very nice input from this. Wow, so many things that we talked about. Anything else very important that I need to mention now? I'll let Sandra jump in.
Yeah, I mean, we got a lot of very, very helpful comments on what to consider for our forest walks, and this is really great. I mean, yeah, this is really good. I mean, some of these things we discussed beforehand also in our group, but this is now a lot of new aspects and things we will process in the days to come and discuss again, and that has been really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, so first, I really liked this round because we had wonderful input from the practitioners, from people actually working in the forest and having also experience with the recreational and therapy aspects of forest. So that was really, really helpful. And I think we put a lot of things on our Jamboard. And what I also found amazing that we could move from question 1 to 2 and 3 and 4 quite smoothly. So I think we have touched all these aspects. And I mean, I would have to go into the details here, but I had the impression that it was very fruitful and helpful. And then I think also for us, for Dr. Forest, we have some very important angles which we should consider in the next steps.
Great.
But maybe Loic, you can add to that because you took the notes. I was busy with putting things on the Jamboard.
I'm not sure I feel confident yet at this point to try to synthesize it because it was a bit patchy, but we talked about some regulations and if the regulation is sufficient already or not. It was mostly concerning about the non-timber forest products aspect. I think we talked less about microclimate aspects. Well, laws are more relevant to the non-timber forest products, of course. We talked also about responsibility. Whose responsibility is it to make the laws inform the forest visitors? Is it an individual responsibility, or is it the forester's responsibility? Then we went on to talk about ways to educate both professionals and forest visitors. But yes, I would have to go through the notes in more detail tomorrow.
Okay.
So we were 5 people and we had a very fruitful discussion and we managed to go through the 4 questions. So to summarize it very quickly, for the scientific questions, there were mainly 3. The first is to have a better knowledge and a better way to estimate or assess the risk and even propose some risk mapping. The second was about biotic interactions that can have positive and negative effects on the risk of tick-borne disease transmission and so on. So we need a better understanding of those interactions, including interaction with game management, because we know that wild boars or deer are host of ticks, for example. And the third question was about landscape or spatial issues, because we know that organisms can move from one place to another. It could be there could be interaction between forest and crop fields in the landscape where hosts can find complementary resources and so on. So these were the main 3 questions. For the politics question, it was a bit more tricky to find any kind of inputs, but we end up with questions about insurance, how to prevent risk and to have maybe some regulation about insurance for diseases that you can get in forest. For the implementations, the 2 main proposals were to talk about education, how to educate people about, again, risk and how to manage risk and avoid the risk. And the second one was, of course, the idea to diversify the forest composition, but with no more clear suggestion than mixing deciduous and conifers or promote natural regeneration. And the 4th question about blind issues were about all about new unknown diseases that are in the forest, either because they are not well described or identified, or because there will be non-native invasive species, and so there is a need for better detection. The second open question was about the effect of no management or rewilding, because it's a trend in European forests, and what would be the effect of that kind of no management or back to wild management on the prevalence or level of risk associated with diseases.
We had a kind of easy job because there was no attendance in the work package 4. We had a small discussion on why was that. We thought it was a topic of interest, but maybe people are already well informed about this. So the idea is that tomorrow, instead of reporting what has been said in the discussion, that we will report a bit of our Dr. Forest experience, what we learned in the literature and from our own experience. And that is still a discussion then tomorrow on these issues, if any interest. So that will be fine tomorrow.